Right, so in this video, we're going to look at the epidermis, and it's slides 6 through 12 on our current McGraw-Hill PowerPoint that we have. Um, and the epidermis, again, this outer layer of this is quote unquote skin, but the outer layer of the integumentary system is in general stratified squamous epithelium. We looked at that in lab. We talked about that. Because it is epithelium, it is going to lack blood vessels. The blood vessels, again, there's that little wavy basement membrane we talked about, and this is in lab. We're going to look at this again. We got these little finger-like capillary bed that goes up in there. We call it dermal papilla, but it does not cross the basement membrane. So the epithelial tissue in general will never have a direct blood supply. And since this is epithelial, it lacks blood supply. It is going to be made up of different layers, and these layers are called stratum, and we're going to talk about the different layers. In lab, we had to know that the bottommost or the deepest layer is stratum basal, and I told you that basal in science means bottom. Anytime you see basal or basilar, it's giving a reference to the fact that it's at the bottom of something. Now, these cells, these stratified squamous cells, are called keratinocytes, and we're going to see this protein called keratin is going to be kind of the defining feature of it. And most people have heard of keratin. If you have any bit of concern for your skin and hair and whatever, you have heard of keratin because you need good keratin to give healthy skin. So these cells are called keratinocytes. All right. So again, site is the suffix that means cells. So cells that have keratin. As they are produced at the stratum basal, which is the layer of highly mitotic cells, as they continue to be pushed upward, these cells, called keratinocytes, will go through the process of keratinization, which means that they are going to start having this protein called keratin start accumulating inside of the cell. It will start hardening the cell and pulling water out of the cell and turn them into these little flat leather shields that we define as stratified squamous. Now, keratin, again, is a protein. It is tough, fibrous, waterproof. And as the cells go from this stratum basal and be pushed up, they start dying. The outermost layer, which is the second layer you needed to know in lab, is called the stratum corneum. And so if you've ever heard of someone having a corn on their skin, which is just a rough patch on their skin, it is because it's a rough patch of the stratum corneum. Now, these stratum corneum cells are dead cells. They're tightly packed, and they have these strong connections that we learned in the previous chapter called desmosomes, which help hold them together until they eventually get to the surface and they are shed off, and we call that dust. Now, we are going to have two areas of special skin called thick skin, and it is on the palms of my hands and the soles of my feet, and we're going to see that it has a special layer, a stratum that the other areas of the body don't have. And so most of the body is a thinner epidermis because it's going to lack this fifth layer. And so we have thick skin and thin skin. Now, again, the functions of skin is to protect against water loss and harmful chemicals, mechanical energy, and mainly pathogens. And again, one of the things that kind of is tough is the fact that the skin does such a great job. This system, this integumentary system, does such a great job of protecting you from these pathogens that you take it for granted. And the only time you really notice it is if, for instance, you have a third-degree burn where it has been removed from a large part of your body. And at that point, you have to live. You don't have to be quarantined. You have to be quarantined in a sterilized environment. You have to live in a special tent so that this doesn't get you. And again, our pathogens don't attack you. You don't realize we are under attack 24/7, and the skin does an amazingly effective job of protecting us. So these are the layers. We're going to look at them in a picture here in a minute, but the outermost layer is the stratum corneum. The layer that is the thick skin, which is only present in the palms of the hands and the soles of the feet, is called stratum lucidium. All right, this is only found in those. This is the defining feature of thick skin. Then we get back to ones that every skin has. We have stratum granulosum, stratum spinosum, and then finally our buddy, the stratum basal, the basal cell layer, the bottom cell layer. Now what happens is this stratum basal, and I'm going to try and erase these little things here. I didn't do a good job of it. All right. So as the stratum basal takes and pushes up, got this one layer of cells that are going through mitosis, and as they push up, the stratum spinosum is all alive. They look like oval kind of cells, normal cells, and as they continue to get pushed up, there will be these granules of keratin that will start forming. And once they start forming in mass, we start calling this the stratum granulosum. The stratum granulosum is going to be a little darker because of the keratin. And then, of course, if it's in the palms of the hands or the soles of the feet, I'm going to go through this stratum lucidium layer, which is just basically a thick layer to help protect those areas. And then finally, the outer layer called the stratum corneum, which is keratinized dead cells that are flattened. They don't have a nuclei. They are basically leather shields that are held together by these desmosomes that are protecting you. So this is a picture of it to kind of show it. Again, stratum basal, spinosum, granulosum, lucidium, and corneum. Now, I've asked students to kind of come up with different ways to remember it. I had a student that had one that I thought was pretty good. Again, when you're studying, you have lists of things. It's kind of nice to come up with mnemonics, just ways to take the first letters or something with each one and put it together. And so I had, since we live here at the beach, I had a student that said, hey, the one that I use is come, let's get sunburned. And unfortunately, a lot of people think like that. Sunburns are not good, and we don't want to think about it like that. Sunburns really can play havoc with the epidermis. But come, let's get sunburned. And that's a way to remember stratum corneum, stratum lucidium, stratum granulosum, stratum spinosum, and stratum basal, CLGSB. Come, let's get sunburned. And don't do that. Again, mnemonics don't have to mean anything. They don't have to do anything except help you remember them. That is, come let's get sunburned is definitely not advice I would give you. So please just know I'm trying to help you remember those layers. So some of the cells that are in here, again, this is mainly new cells for most people. First, we have what are called dendritic or Langerhans cells. These cells, if you know anything about the white blood cells, these cells are very similar to monocytes, which a monocyte, as long as it is in circulation, it's called a monocyte. But when it leaves the circulatory system and goes and is now living in a tissue or an organ, it is then called a macrophage. And so dendritic or Langerhans cells are types of macrophage, and that's what it says they're phagocytes, which means eaters. They're going to be found especially in the stratum spinosum. And so if I have some sort of pathogen that is trying to come in and play havoc with me, these cells will come through, engulf it, and get rid of it. And they are a very effective protector of our body. And again, we are trying to get invaded by pathogens 24/7. The other type is called a tactile. Tactile means light touch. Now, please don't confuse this with the Meissner corpuscles, which are sometimes called tactile corpuscles, but they are called Meissner corpuscles. These are different. These are going to have special cells, Merkel cells, tactile cells, that are plugged in along the stratum basal, and they are for incredibly light touch. So we've got Meissner corpuscles, which are going to be in those dermopapilla, those little wavy areas still in the dermis. This is actually having a cell that is on the stratum basal and connected to a nerve ending that's going out. And so they're very fine touch, and we'll see this in the next picture. And then finally, the kind of the star of the show for us are called melanocytes. These, again, the cell bodies found in the stratum basal, and they're going to produce a pigment called melanin, which gives us our skin color. And all of us have the same number of melanocytes we'll see just through heredity. Different ethnicities that through time lived in certain areas will have either melanocytes that are more active naturally or less active naturally. And for someone who's light skinned, that's someone that's less active naturally. But when UV rays hit it, everybody is the UV light, which we'll look at in just a minute, will stimulate it to produce this melanin. But someone who has darker skin, the melanin's already produced, but being out in the sun will make you darker. All right, so melanin is distributed to the keratinocytes, again, those stratified squamous cells, to protect from UV radiation, because remember, radiation is one of the things that can denature protein. And if that happens, we'll have damage to DNA, we'll have damage to those fibroblasts, and that is what leads to skin cancer, or can lead to skin cancer, especially that DNA. And since that stratum basal is the most important, that's because that's where the mitosis is being, and I shouldn't say most important, but it is high on the list, because it's going through mitosis so quickly. If we do something and damage that DNA and form some sort of mutation, you have a tendency to have cancer then. So this is a cross section of, again, our little layer of the epidermis. We have the stratum basal, the stratum granulosum, we have the stratum spinosum, we have the stratum granulosum here, we have the stratum lucidium, and then this area on the end is the stratum corneum. And so over here, this is showing one of the stratum basal cells going through mitosis and dividing. This area right here, this is the tactile cell and the tactile disc. It is just kind of monitoring, again, very light touch for this. This represents that dendritic or Langerhans cell, and again, it's just sitting there. So if something weasel its way here, this thing like a big old guppy is going to just swallow it down and get rid of it. But this, again, right here, this is the one that I'm going to spend a little more time on. So we've got the tactile cell with its tactile disc sending information on a sensory neuron. We'll study that a lot more when we get into the nervous system. And this thing, this dendritic cell, which is our immune system trying to protect us. But this melanocyte, now I'm going to use a picture that is from the old book because it does a better job. It's hard to see this one that's on here. But this is a picture in the previous edition, and you can see, all right, so we've got this one layer of cells right here. This is the stratum basal. The cell body of the melanocyte is right here, and it has these tentacles that reach up almost all the way into the stratum granulosum. All right. Now, these little octopus-like tentacles are where, when that UV radiation, so let's say I'm light-skinned, I go out to the beach in June, and I have all of this radiation that is coming down. This area is the area that we're kind of concerned about, and we'll start feeling it. So this is the monitor system that's monitoring how much radiation is coming in. So I feel that this solar radiation is coming in, UVA, UVB, whatever, light's hitting it. And so this cell says, hey, I got to do something to protect my buddies on either side of me. And it starts producing melanin. And it takes it and it produces it out here. And when it dumps it off, and I've changed the color, it starts forming this layer of darkened cells in between the cells because it's going to have melanin in it. And that's going to absorb, this melanin absorbs those radiation waves, and so it protects them. So it's almost like opening this umbrella over the stratum basal to help protect those cells. It's a pretty amazing system, and it's mind-blowing how it works. But this is all I want you to know, that the cell body of these melanocytes is going to be on the stratum basal. It produces, a melanocyte produces melanin, which is a skin pigment that helps absorb radiation. And we'll look at this in the next slide here a little bit. So when we talk about skin color again is all about melanin, the pigment melanin. I'm not worried about you knowing the difference of these two because it is, we're not going to get into that. But what I do want you to know is that all people have roughly the same number of melanocytes. Again, it should say roughly, it is not exact. Um, but they vary on how much melanin is produced under normal conditions based on heredity. Um, and so if I lived along the equator, if my ancestors were along the equator in the tropic zone, I'm going to have much darker skin. And oddly enough, if I jump all the way up to the polar regions, because um, snow does not absorb sunlight, it reflects it. That's why if you go skiing, you can get a bad sunburn. Grass and the normal things we're around absorb sunlight, so we can't get a sunburn necessarily from it reflecting off that, but snow it can. And so people that live on the polar regions are also going to have darker skin. If I live in if my heredity, my ancestors came from the areas between those two regions, I'm going to have more white or fairer skin, more light skin. Um, and finally, albinism, or if you're for someone who doesn't produce melanin at all, they're they are referred to as an albino. Albinism is when our body does not produce melanin. We do not have the melanin gene. And then finally, what we look at in this video is we talk a little bit about things that we can do that will affect the skin color. Now, someone who has light skin is going to have a far more drastic change in skin color, but everybody will have a little bit of a change in skin color no matter what if we do these. So environmental factors, again, we live here at the beach, so we definitely know sunlight is something that will change skin color. It doesn't matter how dark you are or how light you are. If you go out in the sun for a long period of time, it's going to change your skin color. We also have these little UV light lamps, sun tanning beds. Now, I will tell you, and this is my opinion, and I can back it up with a lot of stuff, but I mean, people don't always listen. These are not good for you. I understand here and there, but I know people that just go to them all the time, and you're really taking a risk with that. But that's for another time. Again, I'm hoping that everybody here that's listening to this is an adult, so you make your own decisions. And the other one is x-rays. X-rays can change it, but in general, by the time you are around x-rays enough to change your skin color, you have already changed your DNA and you're going to be getting ready to have cancer. That's one of the most sad stories is the people that developed x-rays just thought it was so cool, and they're zapping their family members and stuff and looking at the bones, and it turns out that they were in the process killing them. That's why we have to be careful with how much x-rays we're around. But those are called environmental factors. These are things that we can do and change in our environment to change our skin color. We have some that are lifestyle factors or living factors, physiological factors. And so one of them is I can change my skin color by first oxygenation. Oh, I can't speak this morning. Oxygenation. Anyway, the amount of oxygen in my blood vessels. If I go through and if I start having a problem with my ability to process oxygen, for instance, if I'm around carbon monoxide, which is very poisonous, it takes over and my hemoglobin doesn't carry oxygen, I will have a change, we call it cyanosis, in the look of me. Also, this one is far easier for me to say and far easier to kind of understand. Whether it's vasodilation or vasoconstriction is going to change the amount of blood that's right next to my skin, and that's going to change my skin color. Now, vasodilation getting larger. It's going to cause my skin to be redder. This is when I'm warm or hot. My body's trying to cool down. I put all my blood, or start pumping blood right to the skin, and sweat was going to be on the skin. As the sweat evaporates, we need energy to go from a liquid to a gas, and that uses the energy of the heat of the blood to do that conversion, and that cools you down. Vasoconstriction means the vessels are getting smaller. It's trying to push that blood deeper into your core. This is what happens when you are cold. And this is going to be more, I'll start looking more blue because my blood is being pushed down and away from the skin. I'm going to skip this third one and come back to it. The last one on this list is called jaundice. Jaundice, most people know. I mean, it's generally seen in little babies. If a baby is jaundiced, their liver hasn't fully started operating properly. And what's happening is, as the body's breaking down these red blood cells, it's supposed to break down the bilirubin and biliverdin, that is the breakdown of that, of the red blood cells and the hemoglobin. But if your liver isn't processing it right, so little babies, their liver might not be mature enough, and it just spills over into the bloodstream, and it shows up as yellowish skin. The other time you see this is someone has a liver cirrhosis, and generally you see this in alcoholics, and their skin will start turning yellow. And then the last one here is this pigment called keratin. This is the pigment that is mainly found in carrots, but it's kind of an orange pigment. I have a kind of a funny story with this. When I first started chiropractic school, I went down to, I was going to chiropractic school in Atlanta, Georgia, Life College. And anyway, I became acquainted with juicing, the little machines where you put the fruits and vegetables in, and it chops it all up and spits out juice, and it's really good, and I think it's very healthy. But when I first discovered it, I fell in love with carrot apple juice, and I was probably juicing about a pound of carrots a day. And what happened is, all of a sudden, the palms of my hands and the soles of my feet, because it was mainly the stratum lucidum was the first to get it, I started seeing this keratin pigment. I started turning orange. And it kind of freaked me out until someone reminded me of how this was working. Now, in the real world, most people aren't going to go through that. But what happens a lot of times that a lot of people will go through is babies. Parents will want to feed little babies vegetables. And one of the vegetables that little babies will like to eat are carrots, because carrots are very sweet. And so people will feed their little babies lots of carrot food, baby food, and their babies will turn orange and they kind of freak out. But that's just because of the pigment. So anyway, I hope that helped, and I hope that made sense. But that is the main part of the epidermis that we're going to go over, and we will move on to the next video. See you on the flip side.